Some people can't breathe the moment their phone lights up with a call from their parents. Some people start feeling physically heavy as the holidays get closer, for no reason they can explain. Some people get headaches the second they're within an hour of their hometown. And when they try to tell someone about it, they almost always hear the same thing back. But they're still your family. Is it really that serious? Today, I want to talk about why that sentence, for a lot of people, doesn't feel like comfort at all. It feels like another wound. And I want to talk about something that doesn't get said enough: why people who eventually walk away from family often say their biggest regret isn't leaving. It's all the years they spent staying when they should have gone. Why is it so hard to walk away from the people who hurt you most? Why does the guilt follow you even after you do? And why does that guilt not make you a bad person? Let's get into it. When people find out someone has cut off their family, the first reaction is usually judgment. Cold, heartless, selfish. Some people say it like it's obvious. But when you actually talk to the people who made that choice, you see something completely different. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't revenge. In most cases, it was a quiet decision made after years, sometimes decades, of trying to hold on. Here's something that almost everyone who eventually distances themselves from family has in common. They stopped trusting their own instincts a long time ago. Something felt off when they were young. An uncomfortable feeling they couldn't name. A tightness in their chest. In situations that looked totally normal from the outside. A constant need to read the room, to manage everyone's moods, to shrink themselves down to avoid setting something off. But nobody confirmed that feeling. Nobody said, "Yeah, that's real. That makes sense." Instead, they heard things like, "You're too sensitive." They're saying that because they love you, you can't talk about your family like that. And when you hear those words enough times, something shifts. You don't just learn to push through the pain. You learn to doubt your own experience. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm reading this wrong. Maybe the problem is me. And that, right there, is what keeps people stuck. Because it's not just a painful relationship holding you in place. It's not knowing whether you can even trust what you feel. And here's the thing that makes it even harder to see from the outside. For most people in these situations, there's no single dramatic event you can point to. It's the comparison that gets dropped at the dinner table like it's nothing. Your brother already has his life together. What are you doing? It's the dismissal that passes so fast you almost wonder if you imagined it. It's one person in the house who can change the entire atmosphere with a single look. It's knowing that if you say the wrong thing, the rest of the day is going to be cold and quiet. In a way that feels suffocating. From the outside, none of that looks like much. That's exactly what makes it so hard to explain. There's no bruise. Nobody screamed. To someone watching, it just looks like a normal family dinner. But your body knows. That tight feeling in your stomach when a specific number shows up on your phone. That exhaustion that starts building days before you even have to make the trip home. Waking up at 3 a.m. just from the thought of walking back through that front door. Those aren't exaggerations. Those are things your nervous system has learned. That relationship isn't safe. And I think that's the cruelest part of all of this. On the surface, nothing looks wrong. But inside one person, the alarm has been going off for years. That kind of pain is invisible. And invisible pain is the loneliest kind. Because you can't even explain it well enough to get support. So why do people stay so long? This is where most people get it wrong. The reason these relationships are so hard to leave isn't that they're all bad. That's the part nobody talks about. The person who said the most damaging thing to you last night is also the person who shows up with your favorite food the next morning. The person who made you feel completely worthless is suddenly, genuinely worried about how you're doing. After pushing you to your limit, they hand you some cash and act like nothing happened. And so your brain starts going in circles. Was I overreacting? Have they actually changed? Maybe this time will be different. That hope, right there, is what keeps people from leaving. If a relationship was painful, every single moment, it would be easier to walk away. But when warmth shows up just often enough, your brain starts anticipating the next good moment. And in a family relationship, that pull is stronger than most people realize. Because deep down, what you want isn't just for it to stop hurting. You want the very person who hurt you to be the one who finally understands you. To comfort you. To love you the way you needed to be loved. And that isn't weakness. That isn't being naive. That is attachment and survival. Wired together in ways that go all the way back to childhood. There's a term for this: trauma bonding. Trauma bonding isn't about having bad judgment. It isn't about being weak. It's an ancient survival circuit in your brain that never got the memo that things were supposed to change. Think about it from the perspective of a child. Your parents weren't just your parents. They were your entire world. Food, safety, warmth, survival, all of it came through them. So your young brain learned something very early. Loving the people who take care of you and surviving are basically the same thing. That lesson gets wired in deep. And even when you grow up, even when you're fully capable of taking care of yourself, that circuit doesn't just switch off. This is why leaving feels so impossible. This is why the guilt hits so hard even after you do. For a lot of people, that's exactly where it starts. Here's how I'd put it. People don't stay because they're weak. They stay because they loved completely, the way they were supposed to love. The problem was never that they held on too long. The problem is that the love wasn't being returned in a way that was safe. Now, let's flip the script for a second. A lot of people describe someone who has cut off their family as someone who ran away, someone who got hurt and chose to hide from it. But I'd argue it's actually the opposite. Cutting a familiar relationship, one that's been woven into your sense of self since childhood. People who shaped your entire world, good parts and bad parts, is not running. That takes an enormous amount of deliberate, painful choice. And honestly, the harder part comes after. Most people assume that once you create distance from a toxic family situation, you feel free almost immediately. But the first thing that usually shows up isn't freedom. It's a strange, heavy quiet. You don't have anything to fight anymore, but you're still anxious. The holidays roll around and instead of relief, there's this hollow, unnamed feeling. A place that made you miserable is now just empty. And somehow that emptiness unsettles you. This is not a strange reaction. Psychology has a name for it: ambiguous loss. It's grief for something that hasn't technically died. A loss without a funeral. A relationship that ended without an ending. When someone passes away, there's a structure for the grief. There's a ceremony, a place to cry, people to hold you. Rituals that say, this loss is real and it matters. But when you end a relationship with a living family member, there's no ceremony for that. They're still out there somewhere. Still eating dinner. Still posting photos. Still going through their life. What's gone isn't the person. What's gone is the relationship. And that kind of grief doesn't have a script. It doesn't have a timeline. It sits inside you quietly, for a long time. And the thing that shakes people up even more than the outside noise, more than the judgment from other people, is the voice that comes from inside. Maybe I was too sensitive. Did I really need to take it that far? What if I regret this later? What if they're gone someday and I have to live with this forever? Let me be very clear about something. That voice is not a sign of weakness. That voice is what you sound like when you're someone who has genuine empathy. When you're someone who never fully stopped trying to make the relationship work. A truly cold person wouldn't be asking those questions. A truly cold person wouldn't have stayed long enough to be this exhausted. So here's the reframe. That guilt isn't proof that you did something wrong. That guilt is a record of how hard you tried. And for how long, before you finally decided to protect yourself. Now, there's some broader context worth sitting with here. A lot of parents in the generation above us grew up in a time when surviving was the priority. Expressing emotions was not considered strength. Keeping going, no matter what, was the virtue. Providing food, a roof, an education, that was the definition of good parenting. Warmth wasn't even part of the job description. So some parents became parents without ever being given the language for what love actually looks, sounds, and feels like. Not because they didn't want to give it. Because nobody gave it to them either. Understanding that matters. But here's what I want to make very clear. Understanding someone is not the same as accepting what happened to you. You can hold space for why they were the way they were, and still recognize that it caused real damage. You can understand their story without erasing yours. Compassion for them does not require you to keep hurting. After people create distance from a difficult family situation, many of them ask themselves a version of the same question. For the very first time. What do I actually like? What do I actually want? What kind of person do I want to become? Before, there was never space to ask any of that. Every decision, what to eat, what career to pursue, who to date, where to live, was filtered through someone else's approval, someone else's reaction, someone else's mood. So when that pressure lifts, it doesn't always feel like freedom right away. It feels like standing in a room that's suddenly very quiet. But I genuinely believe that quiet is often where healing begins. Because in that empty space, for the first time, your own voice has room to come in. You're allowed to mess up. Not getting it right the first time doesn't make you a failure. You don't have to earn the right to exist by meeting someone else's standards. Learning to say those things to yourself, especially when you never heard them growing up, is uncomfortable at first. It feels fake. It feels embarrassing. Like you're performing something you don't actually believe yet. But that's exactly the process. You practice it until the inner critic gets a little quieter, and a different voice starts to take up more space. And once that happens, something else shifts too. New relationships start to find their way in. Not family by blood, but people who actually show up. People who don't disappear when you fail. People who root for you without conditions, who don't need an explanation for why you seem tense today, who just get it. For some people, that's a friend. For others, it's a partner, a therapist, or a community they never expected to find. Built not on DNA, but on choice and trust. For a lot of people, that is the first time a relationship has ever felt like what family was supposed to feel like. So here's where I land. Choosing distance from family isn't giving up on relationships. For a lot of people, it's the moment they finally stop abandoning themselves. That's not coldness. That's not being heartless. That's self-protection that arrived, maybe years late, but it still arrived. Cutting off contact with family isn't the end of all connection. It's much closer to the beginning of a relationship with yourself. After decades of living by someone else's rules, someone else's expectations, someone else's definition of who you were supposed to be, you finally choose your own side. From the outside, it looks quiet. But inside that person, something enormous is shifting. Before I go, I want to say this directly to anyone who recognized themselves in this video. The guilt you're carrying is real. The grief is real. The longing, even for something that hurt you, is real. The anger is real. None of those feelings are wrong. And whether you've already walked away, or you're still figuring it out, healing doesn't depend on which decision you made. Healing depends on whether you're moving toward yourself. You can heal while staying. You can heal after leaving. What matters is that you stop letting your life collapse around someone else's needs. So remember this. Leaving didn't make you a bad person. You held on longer than most people would have. And choosing yourself, finally, after all of that? That's not abandonment. That's the bravest thing you've done in a long time. If this video reached you today, if any part of it felt like your story, drop a comment below. Even just a few words. Because someone else is going to read what you write, in their own dark moment. And your words might be exactly what gets them through. Thank you for watching.